What if the most dangerous countdown in the world wasn't measured by missiles in the air, but by uranium inside a centrifuge? For decades, concerns over Iran's nuclear program have shaped diplomacy, military planning, and security policy across the Middle East. Governments have debated sanctions, negotiated international agreements, and invested enormous intelligence resources into answering one central question: how close is Iran to producing the material needed for a nuclear weapon? In recent weeks, that question has become increasingly urgent. Several media outlets and defense analysts have reported that new intelligence assessments suggest Iran's called breakout timeline may be significantly shorter than previously believed. While the exact estimates vary, the discussion is centered on one striking figure: 11 days. That number has generated headlines around the world, but it has also created widespread misunderstanding. It does not mean Iran would possess a fully operational nuclear weapon in 11 days. Instead, according to publicly available assessments, it refers to the estimated time required to produce enough weapons-grade highly enriched uranium for a single nuclear device, assuming enrichment continues without interruption. Turning that material into a deployable weapon would still require additional engineering, weaponization, testing, and delivery integration steps that remain far more difficult to verify through open-source intelligence. Even so, the distinction does little to reduce the strategic significance of the timeline. For military planners, crossing the threshold of fissile material production represents an entirely different level of concern than simply maintaining a civilian nuclear program. To understand why, we need to look beyond politics and examine the science behind nuclear enrichment. Natural uranium contains only a small percentage of the fissile isotope known as uranium-235. Civilian nuclear power reactors typically require uranium enriched to around 3 to 5%. Iran, however, has produced uranium enriched to 60% purity, a level that far exceeds normal civilian energy requirements while remaining below the roughly 90% generally associated with weapons-grade material. The important point is that enrichment does not become progressively harder at the same rate. Many nuclear experts have noted that once a country reaches high enrichment levels, the remaining technical steps toward weapons-grade material can become significantly shorter than the earlier stages of the process. This concept is often referred to as the breakout timeline, the estimated period required to produce enough fissile material for one nuclear device. It is this timeline, rather than the construction of an actual bomb, that has become the focus of intelligence agencies, diplomats, and defense officials. For years, negotiations surrounding Iran's nuclear activities, including the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, were designed to extend that timeline, giving the international community sufficient warning before Iran could potentially accumulate weapons-grade material. Today, many analysts believe that warning window has narrowed considerably, and if those assessments are accurate, the next phase of this story will no longer be defined by diplomacy alone, but by the difficult choices facing governments across the region. Understanding Iran's nuclear program requires separating two very different questions. The first is whether Iran can produce weapons-grade uranium. The second and far more complicated question is whether it can transform that material into a reliable, deliverable nuclear weapon. Those are not the same challenge. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran has significantly expanded its stockpile of highly enriched uranium in recent years. Inspectors have also reported the continued operation of advanced centrifuges at facilities such as Natanz nuclear facility and Fordow fuel enrichment plant, two sites that have remained central to international monitoring efforts. These developments have fueled growing concern among Western governments. However, enrichment alone does not automatically produce a nuclear weapon. Designing a functional device requires solving an entirely different set of engineering challenges. These include developing an effective weapon design, manufacturing precisely shaped fissile components, building reliable detonation systems, and integrating the completed device with a delivery platform such as a ballistic missile. Much of that work cannot be directly observed through satellite imagery alone. This is why intelligence assessments often differ. International inspectors primarily monitor declared nuclear activities under agreed inspection frameworks. Intelligence agencies, on the other hand, combine satellite surveillance, intercepted communications, procurement analysis, and human intelligence to build a broader picture of a country's nuclear activities. The difficulty is that most of those intelligence assessments remain classified. As a result, public debate often mixes verified information with informed estimates, making it difficult to distinguish confirmed facts from analytical judgment. This distinction has become especially important as reports of a shortened breakout timeline continue to circulate. Some analysts argue that Iran's expanding enrichment capability represents a significant strategic warning. even if there is no public evidence that a political decision to assemble a nuclear weapon has been made. Others caution that possessing the technical capability does not necessarily mean a country intends to cross that final threshold. History offers several examples of states developing advanced nuclear technology without immediately producing operational nuclear weapons. For policymakers, however, capability alone can fundamentally change the strategic landscape. Military planning is rarely based on intentions, because intentions can change overnight. Capabilities are different. Once the technical foundation exists, governments must consider how quickly that capability could be translated into military power if political circumstances suddenly shift. That uncertainty explains why Israel, the United States, and several European governments continue to monitor Iran's nuclear activities so closely. For them, the concern is not simply what Iran is doing today. It is how much time would remain to respond if tomorrow's political decisions proved very different from today's. And as that estimated warning window becomes shorter, the range of available policy options becomes increasingly limited. For decision-makers, time itself may become the most valuable strategic resource of all. If the breakout timeline continues to shrink, governments across the Middle East may soon face decisions they have spent decades trying to avoid. For Israel, the issue has never been limited to uranium enrichment alone. Successive Israeli governments, regardless of political party, have consistently argued that preventing a hostile regional power from acquiring a potential nuclear weapons capability is a fundamental national security priority. That position has remained remarkably consistent for more than 20 years. Israeli officials have repeatedly stated that while diplomacy is preferable, military options must remain available if they conclude that negotiations can no longer prevent a potential nuclear breakout. Whether that point has been reached remains the subject of intense debate. Publicly, officials continue to emphasize diplomacy while avoiding detailed discussion of military planning. Privately, however, defense analysts generally assume that contingency planning has existed for many years. Preparing military options does not necessarily mean those options will be used. It means governments want them available if political leaders determine they are necessary. Should diplomacy ultimately fail, any military operation would likely involve far more than a single airstrike. Military experts have long argued that a campaign targeting a nuclear program would require a combination of intelligence collection, cyber operations, electronic warfare, suppression of air defenses, precision strikes, and continuous battle damage assessment. The objective would not simply be to damage individual facilities. It would be to delay or disrupt the broader nuclear infrastructure supporting them. Even then, the results would remain uncertain. Modern nuclear programs are designed with redundancy in mind. Facilities may be geographically dispersed, hardened against attack, or capable of resuming operations after repairs. Scientific knowledge cannot be eliminated through air power alone. For that reason, many analysts caution against assuming that any single military operation could permanently end a mature nuclear program. The United States faces a similarly complex calculation. Washington has repeatedly affirmed its commitment to preventing nuclear proliferation while also seeking to avoid a wider regional conflict. Those two objectives often reinforce each other, but not always. A military strike intended to delay one security threat could simultaneously create new risks, including attacks on U.S. personnel stationed throughout the region, disruptions to global energy markets, or a broader confrontation involving Iranian-stacked armed groups. This explains why American policy has generally combined diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, military deterrence, and intelligence cooperation rather than relying on a single approach. As the breakout timeline becomes shorter, however, policymakers may find that the number of available options begins to shrink as well. And history suggests that when strategic decision-makers believe time is running out, their willingness to accept greater risks often increases. Whether that moment has already arrived remains uncertain, but few defense analysts would argue that the decisions being made today carry anything less than long-term consequences for the security of the entire region. Whether the current estimates prove accurate or not, one fact is already becoming clear. The conversation surrounding Iran's nuclear program is no longer centered on whether the issue matters. It is centered on how much time remains for diplomacy to produce meaningful results. That shift alone has significant strategic consequences. For decades, international efforts focused on extending Iran's breakout timeline through negotiations, sanctions, inspections, and monitoring agreements. The objective was never simply to limit uranium enrichment, it was to ensure that governments would have enough warning to respond before a potential nuclear threshold could be reached. If that warning window continues to shrink, every future decision becomes more difficult. Diplomatic solutions require time, Military planning also requires time. Ironically, time is becoming the one resource that appears increasingly limited. This is why governments across the region continue to monitor developments so closely. A military confrontation between Israel and Iran would almost certainly affect far more than the two countries directly involved. Energy markets, global shipping routes, regional security partnerships, and international diplomacy could all experience significant consequences if tensions were to escalate further. For that reason, policymakers continue searching for ways to reduce risks while preserving credible deterrence. Whether those goals can still be achieved simultaneously remains one of the defining strategic questions of our time. At the same time, it is important to recognize that nuclear capability is not determined by a single number. The widely discussed 11-day estimate represents one analytical assessment, based on available intelligence, not a publicly verified countdown to an operational nuclear weapon. As with many intelligence estimates, it is subject to revision as new information becomes available. History has repeatedly shown that strategic assessments evolve, sometimes dramatically. As additional evidence emerges, that uncertainty does not diminish the seriousness of the issue. Instead, it reminds us why intelligence, diplomacy, and military planning must be evaluated together rather than in isolation. The challenge facing today's decision-makers is not simply responding to what is already known. It is preparing for what remains uncertain. Perhaps that is the most important lesson from this entire discussion. Modern conflicts are rarely shaped by a single missile launch or one dramatic military operation. More often, they are shaped by years of intelligence gathering, technological competition, political calculations, and decisions made long before the world sees the first headline. Whether the current crisis ultimately leads to renewed negotiations, prolonged deterrence, or a more dangerous confrontation is something no analyst can predict with certainty. But one conclusion already appears difficult to ignore. The debate is no longer just about Iran's nuclear program. It is about how the international community responds when the time available for diplomacy grows shorter, while the consequences of miscalculation grow larger. And that question will continue to shape security in the Middle East and far beyond for years to come. If you enjoyed this analysis and would like to see more in-depth coverage of military technology, geopolitical strategy, and global security, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.